The corridors of Windsor Castle were silent that afternoon. Too silent. The kind of silence that comes before a storm. Prince William walked slowly toward his grandmother's private drawing room, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. He knew what was waiting for him behind that oak door, and he knew there would be no escape. Outside the tall windows, gray clouds gathered over the English countryside. Inside, something far more intimidating waited. Queen Elizabeth II sat in her favorite chair, her hands folded in her lap. Her expression was unreadable, carved from decades of royal discipline. But her eyes told a different story. They were sharp, disappointed. Cold William stopped at the doorway. He straightened his tie, cleared his throat, and knocked twice. The sound echoed through the empty hall. "Enter," came the voice from inside, calm, controlled, but with an edge that made his stomach twist. Before we continue with what happened next, if you're enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens when the Queen finally speaks. William stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt like a prison gate locking. 2 royal guards stood on either side of the room, their faces blank, their eyes forward. They had been trained never to react, never to speak of what they witnessed. But today, they would see something they'd never forget. The Queen did not stand. She did not smile. She simply looked at her grandson, the future king, and let the silence stretch between them like a canyon. "Sit," she said finally. William sat. His hands rested on his knees, fingers laced together to stop them from trembling. He had faced cameras, crowds, and critics, but nothing compared to this moment. Nothing compared to disappointing her. "Do you know why you're here?" the Queen asked. Her voice was measured, each word chosen with precision. "Yes, ma'am," William replied quietly. "Then explain it to me." He opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain? How could he make her understand the pressure, the mistakes, the weight of being second in line to the throne? How could he tell her that even princes break under the burden of expectation? The Queen leaned forward slightly. "I have spent 70 years protecting this family. 70 years ensuring that the crown remains respected, dignified, and beyond reproach. And in one afternoon, you have jeopardized all of it." Her words were not loud. They didn't need to be. They cut through him like glass. "Photographs," she continued, "are everywhere. The headlines are brutal. And worst of all, you gave them the ammunition. You handed them a story that makes us look weak, careless, human." William's jaw tightened. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he was human, that beneath the titles and the protocols, he was just a man trying to hold his family together. But he said nothing. Because in this room, there was only one voice that mattered, and that voice was not done yet. Asterisk, the Queen stood slowly, her movements deliberate. She walked to the window, her back to William, her silhouette framed against the gray sky. The guards remained motionless. One of them, a young man named Thomas, would later tell his wife that he had never seen the prince look so small. "When your mother died," the Queen said softly, "still facing the window, the world watched you. 2 young boys walking behind a coffin. The entire nation wept for you. They loved you. They protected you." William's throat tightened. He stared at his hands. "I made sure you had space to grieve, to grow, to become the man you needed to be. And you did. You became a devoted father, a loving husband, a symbol of the modern monarchy." She turned to face him, and her eyes glistened, just for a moment. "So why, William? Are you throwing it all away?" The question hung in the air. William felt his chest constrict. He had asked himself the same thing 1,000 times. Late at night, when Catherine slept beside him, in the mirror every morning, in the eyes of his children when they asked why the cameras followed them everywhere. "I made a mistake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A mistake?" The Queen's tone sharpened. "You were seen arguing with Catherine in public. Cameras captured you losing your temper at a charity event." And then she paused, her voice dropping even lower. "You were photographed leaving a private club at 2 in the morning, alone, without your security, without your dignity. William's face flushed. I needed air. I needed to think. You needed to remember who you are. Her voice cracked through the room like thunder. The guards flinched, just slightly. You are not a private citizen, William. You do not get to have breakdowns in public. You do not get to stumble out of clubs like some reckless boy. You are the Prince of Wales, the future king. And every action you take reflects on this family. She moved closer, her gaze piercing. Do you think I have never been angry? Never been exhausted? Never wanted to walk away from all of this? Her voice softened, but the intensity remained. I have carried this crown through wars, scandals, deaths, and betrayals, and I have never once let the world see me break. Because the moment I do, everything we have built crumbles. William looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. I'm trying, Granny. I'm trying so hard. Trying is not enough. She stepped back, her expression hardening once more. The palace has issued a statement. We have controlled the narrative as best we can. But the damage is done. The public is questioning you. The press is circling. And the family is watching. She returned to her chair, sitting with the same regal posture that had defined her reign. You will issue a personal apology. You will attend every engagement on your schedule for the next 6 months without complaint. You will rebuild the trust you have shattered. And you will do it with a smile on your face, because that is what we do. William nodded slowly. His hands gripped his knees, and William. The Queen's voice dropped to a near whisper. If you ever embarrass this family again, there will be consequences. Real consequences. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. Good. Now leave. I cannot look at you right now. The words struck him like a physical blow. William stood, his legs unsteady. He bowed his head and walked toward the door. His hand reached for the handle. William, the Queen called out. He stopped, hope flickering in his chest. Perhaps she would soften. Perhaps she would tell him she still believed in him. But when he turned, her face was stone. Close the door quietly on your way out, he did. And the moment the door clicked shut, something inside him shattered. The hallway stretched before him like an endless tunnel. William walked quickly, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The walls seemed to close in. The portraits of his ancestors stared down at him with judgment in their painted eyes. Kings and queens who had ruled with iron wills and unshakable resolve. And here he was, barely holding himself together. He turned a corner, his vision blurring. He needed to get away. Away from the castle. Away from the weight of the crown. Away from the suffocating expectations that had wrapped around him since birth. But there was nowhere to go. A young maid passed by, curtsying quickly. She glanced at his face, and her eyes widened. She hurried away, her footsteps echoing down the stone corridor. William pressed his palm against the cold wall, steadying himself. His chest heaved. His throat burned. He found himself at a small alcove near the east wing, a forgotten corner of the castle where tourists never wandered and staff rarely passed. A single window overlooked the gardens. Rain had begun to fall, streaking the glass like tears. William leaned against the wall and slid down until he sat on the floor. His head fell into his hands, and for the first time in years he let himself break. The tears came silently at first. Hot and bitter, they soaked into his palms as he pressed his hands against his face, trying to muffle the sound. But the sobs came anyway, shaking his shoulders, tearing through his chest. He cried for the boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin, for the man who could never escape the cameras, for the father who didn't know how to protect his children from the same fate. He cried because he was tired. So impossibly tired, sir. The voice was soft, hesitant. William's head snapped up. Standing a few feet away was Thomas, one of the guards from the Queen's drawing room. The young man's face was conflicted, his training warring with his humanity. I'm fine, William said quickly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. His voice cracked. I'm fine. Thomas didn't move. For a moment, the two men simply looked at each other. Then, slowly, Thomas stepped closer. He didn't kneel. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, a silent witness to a pain that protocol said he should ignore. "She's always been like this," William said quietly, his voice raw. "Even when I was a child. Nothing was ever good enough. Every mistake was a betrayal. Every misstep was a threat to the crown." He laughed bitterly. "Do you know what it's like to be raised by a woman who values duty over love?" Thomas remained silent, but his eyes softened. "I love my children," William continued, his voice breaking again. "I love them so much it terrifies me. And I'm so afraid I'm going to fail them the way I've failed her. The way I fail everyone." The rain outside grew heavier, drumming against the window. The sound filled the silence between them. "My father was a guard here for 30 years, Thomas said finally. His voice was low, careful. "He told me once that the Queen cried the night Princess Diana died. Just once, in private, where no one could see." William looked up at him, his eyes red and swollen. "She's not cruel, sir," Thomas continued. "She's just ... afraid. Afraid of what happens if the crown loses its power. If the people stop believing in it. She spent her whole life holding it together. And I think she's terrified that one crack will bring it all down." William closed his eyes. "I'm so tired of being strong." "Then don't be. Not right now." Thomas glanced down the hallway, then back at William. "In 5 minutes, I have to return to my post. And when I do, I'll have seen nothing. But until then, you're just a man who's had a hard day. And that's okay." William nodded slowly. He took a shaky breath, then another. The tears had stopped, but the ache remained, deep and endless. "Thank you," he whispered. Thomas nodded once, then stepped back into the shadows of the corridor. But before he left completely, he paused. "For what it's worth, sir," he said quietly, "I think you're doing better than you know." Then he was gone. And William was alone again, sitting on the cold floor of a forgotten corner, trying to remember how to breathe. Asterisk, by the time William returned to Kensington Palace, night had fallen. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of wet earth and stone. The lights in the windows glowed warm and golden, stark contrast to the cold emptiness inside him. He stood at the entrance for a moment, his hand on the door. Inside, his children would be sleeping. Catherine would be waiting. Life would continue as if nothing had happened. Because that was what they did. They carried on. Always the door opened before he could turn the handle. Catherine stood there, wrapped in a soft cardigan, her hair loose around her shoulders. She didn't speak. She simply looked at him, and in that look, he saw everything. She knew. Of course she knew. The children. He asked, his voice hoarse. "Asleep," she said gently. She stepped aside, letting him enter. The warmth of the house enveloped him, but it couldn't reach the cold place in his chest. They walked to the sitting room in silence. Catherine poured him tea, even though he hadn't asked for it. She sat beside him on the sofa, close but not touching. Waiting, William stared at the cup in his hands. The steam rose in delicate spirals, disappearing into the air. "She hates me," he said finally. "She doesn't hate you," Catherine replied softly. "You didn't see her face. You didn't hear her voice." He set the cup down, his hands trembling slightly. "She looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was a disappointment she could barely stand to acknowledge." Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she reached over and took his hand. Her touch was warm, grounding. "Your grandmother has spent her entire life in a cage of duty. She doesn't know how to show love the way normal people do. But that doesn't mean she doesn't feel it. Doesn't feel like love," William said bitterly. "It feels like judgment. Like I'm constantly being measured against some impossible standard I'll never reach. Because you're not trying to reach her standard," Catherine said gently. "You're trying to be yourself, and that terrifies her." William looked at his wife, confusion flickering in his eyes. Catherine squeezed his hand. "She sees you changing things, being more open with the children, talking about mental health, showing emotion in public, and every time you do, it's a rejection of everything she was taught, everything she sacrificed." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You're showing the world that royalty can be human, and to her, that's dangerous. So what am I supposed to do?" William asked, his voice breaking. Stop being a father. Stop trying to make things better. Just put on the mask and pretend everything is fine. No, Catherine said firmly. You keep being exactly who you are, because that's what our children need. That's what the country needs, even if she can't see it yet. William leaned back against the sofa, exhaustion washing over him. I cried today, he admitted quietly. In front of one of the guards, I completely fell apart. Catherine's expression softened. Good. He looked at her, surprised. You're human, William. You're allowed to break sometimes. You're allowed to feel. Shh. She moved closer, resting her head on his shoulder. Your mother taught you that. And I know it's hard when your grandmother makes you feel like every emotion is a weakness, but it's not. It's your strength. They sat in silence for a long moment, the clock on the mantel ticking softly. Outside, London hummed with life. Inside, two people held each other in the quiet. I don't know if I can do this anymore, William whispered. The pressure, the expectations, the constant fear that one wrong move will destroy everything. You're not alone, Catherine reminded him. You have me. You have the children. You have people who believe in you, even when you don't believe in yourself. William closed his eyes. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to feel the strength she saw in him. But all he felt was tired, broken, lost. What if she's right? He asked, what if I'm not strong enough? What if I fail? Catherine pulled back and looked him in the eye. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. Then you get back up, and you try again. That's what you've always done. That's who you are. A small sound came from the doorway. They both turned to see George standing there in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Daddy, the boy said sleepily. Are you okay? William's heart clenched. He opened his arms, and George ran to him, climbing onto the sofa and burrowing into his father's embrace. William held his son close, breathing in the scent of lavender shampoo and innocence. I'm okay, buddy, he whispered, kissing the top of George's head. I'm okay now. But as he held his son, feeling the small, trusting weight against his chest, William made a silent vow. He would not let his children grow up the way he had. He would not teach them to hide their pain. He would break the cycle, even if it meant breaking himself in the process. 3 days passed. William fulfilled his duties with mechanical precision. He smiled for the cameras. He shook hands at charity events. He read speeches written by others, his voice steady and measured. To the world, he was the perfect prince, composed, dignified, unbreakable. But at night, when the house was quiet and Catherine slept beside him, he sat in his study and stared at a blank piece of paper. He had tried to write the letter a dozen times. Each attempt ended crumpled in the bin. How do you tell your grandmother that you're drowning? How do you explain that the weight of duty feels like chains around your chest, tighter with each breath? How do you make her understand that you're not rebelling against her legacy, but fighting to survive it? The clock struck 2 in the morning. William picked up his pen again. This time the words came. Dear Granny, I have tried to write this letter many times, and each time I have failed. Not because I don't know what to say, because I am afraid of what it will cost to say it. You told me that I have embarrassed the family, that I have jeopardized everything you have spent 70 years protecting. And you are right. I did make mistakes. I did let my emotions show. I did give the press ammunition, but I am also tired, Granny. I am so tired of being perfect. Of pretending that the pressure doesn't suffocate me. Of hiding my pain because pain is not royal. When my mother died, you told me to be strong. And I walked behind that coffin with my head high, even though I wanted to scream. I smiled for the cameras, even though I was dying inside. I became the man you needed me to be. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I look at my children, and I see their innocence, their joy, and I am terrified that one day they will be standing where I am now, drowning in duty and expectation, wondering if they will ever be good enough. I don't want that for them. I don't want them to be afraid of being human. I don't want them to cry in corners where no one can see. Because showing emotion is a sign of weakness. I know you believe that duty comes before everything. Before love. Before happiness, before self, and I respect that. I truly do. But I cannot live that way anymore. I cannot sacrifice my children's childhood the way mine was sacrificed. I am not asking for your approval. I know I will never have it. Not really. But I am asking for your understanding. I am trying to be a better father than I had, a better king than the ones who came before. And that means breaking some of the rules you taught me. I will always honor you. I will always respect the crown. But I will also be a man who cries when he is hurting, a father who hugs his children in public, a husband who shows love openly. If that makes me weak in your eyes, then I am weak. But I would rather be weak and human than strong and hollow. I love you, Granny. Even when you cannot love me back. William He stared at the letter for a long time. The words blurred through unshed tears. Then slowly he folded it and placed it in his desk drawer. He would never send it. They both knew it. Some things were too dangerous to say out loud, but writing it had freed something inside him. A small crack in the armor he had worn for so long. The next morning, an envelope arrived at Kensington Palace. It bore the royal seal. William's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a single card, written in the Queen's familiar, precise handwriting. William, come to tea on Thursday. Just the two of us. Elizabeth, no apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just an invitation. Simple, direct, and somehow more meaningful than any grand gesture could have been. Catherine found him standing in the hallway, staring at the card. What is it? She asked. She wants to see me, he said quietly. For tea? Catherine smiled softly. Then you'll go. I don't know what she wants to say. Maybe she doesn't either, Catherine suggested. Maybe she just wants to see her grandson. William looked at the card again. The words were so formal, so controlled, but beneath them, he thought he could sense something else. Something fragile and uncertain. Something almost like regret. Do you think she'll ever change? He asked. Catherine took his hand. I don't know, but I think she's trying. In her own way? William nodded slowly. He tucked the card into his pocket, feeling its weight against his chest. Thursday was 2 days away. 2 days to prepare himself, to decide what he would say, to find the courage to face her again. But this time, he wouldn't go alone. This time, he would carry the words he had written with him, not to give to her, but to remind himself that he was more than the crown, more than the duty, more than the mistakes. He was human, and that was enough. Thursday arrived, gray and windswept. William drove to Windsor Castle alone, his hands tight on the steering wheel. The countryside rushed past in blurs of green and brown. His mind raced with possibilities. What would she say? Would she apologize? Would she lecture him again? Or would they simply sit in silence, pretending everything was fine? The guards at the gate nodded as he passed. They knew him well. They had watched him grow from a boy to a man within these walls. He wondered if they knew about the tears. If Thomas had told anyone. If the story of the broken prince had become whispered gossip in the servants' quarters. He parked and walked to the private entrance. The same corridors. The same portraits. But this time, something felt different. Lighter, perhaps. Or maybe he was just different. The drawing room door was already open. The Queen sat by the window, afternoon light streaming across her face. She looked smaller somehow, older, for the first time. William saw her not as the immortal monarch, but as a woman in her 90s, carrying the weight of a lifetime. Sit, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Her voice was softer than before. Not warm, but not cold either. William sat. A tea service had been laid out between them. The Queen poured with steady hands, adding milk and sugar exactly as he liked it. The simple gesture surprised him. When was the last time she had served him tea herself? She handed him the cup. Their fingers brushed for just a moment. I have been thinking, the Queen said, settling back into her chair, about what happened the other day. William waited, barely breathing. I was harsh, she continued. Perhaps too harsh. The words hung in the air like something precious and breakable. You were right to be angry, William said quietly. I did make mistakes. Yes, you did. She took a sip of tea, her eyes distant. But I have made mistakes too. Many of them, and I have never had the luxury of admitting them. William looked at her, startled. The Queen set down her cup with a soft clink. When your mother died, I thought I was protecting you by teaching you to be strong, to never show weakness, to put duty above all else. She paused, her voice catching almost imperceptibly. I see now that I may have taught you to hide instead. Granny, she held up a hand, silencing him. Let me finish. This is difficult enough as it is. William nodded, his throat tight. I have watched you with your children, she said, the way you hold them, the way you laugh with them, the way you let them see you as a person, not just a title. Her eyes glistened, just slightly. You are doing what I could never do, what your father could never do. You are breaking a cycle that has lasted generations. I'm trying, William whispered. I'm trying to be better. I know, the Queen said, and it terrifies me. William frowned. Why? Because if you succeed, it means I failed. Her voice cracked just for a moment. It means I spent 70 years building walls when I should have been building bridges. It means I chose duty over love, and in doing so, I lost something precious. The silence that followed was profound. William could hear the clock ticking, the wind outside. His own heartbeat. You didn't fail, he said finally. You did what you thought was right. What you were taught was right. And you kept the crown stable through impossible times. That matters, Granny. It matters so much. The Queen looked at him, and for the first time in his life, William saw tears in her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, a lifetime of control reasserting itself. But they had been there, real and undeniable. I cannot change who I am, she said. I cannot suddenly become warm and affectionate. That is not in my nature, and it is too late to learn. I'm not asking you to change, William said. I just need you to understand why I must. She nodded slowly. I do understand. More than you know. She reached across and placed her hand on his. The touch was brief, formal, but genuine. You will be a better king than I was a queen, because you will rule with both strength and heart. And when your time comes, the crown will be better for it. William's eyes burned. He blinked hard, fighting the tears. I don't want to disappoint you. You haven't, she said firmly. You have challenged me, frustrated me, made me question everything I believed, but you have never disappointed me. They sat together as the afternoon light faded into evening. They talked of simple things, the children, the gardens, an upcoming engagement. The conversation was stilted at times, awkward. They were both learning a new language, one without the armor they had worn for so long. When William finally stood to leave, the Queen walked him to the door. She didn't hug him. That would never be her way. But she placed her hand on his cheek, just for a moment, and looked into his eyes. Be brave, William, she said softly. Be the king I could never be. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Then he turned and walked down the corridor, his heart both heavy and light. Behind him, the Queen watched until he disappeared from view. Then she closed the door and returned to her chair by the window. Thomas, the young guard, stood at his post in the hallway. He had heard everything. He would never speak of it. But years later, when he told his grandchildren about his time at Windsor Castle, he would remember this day. The day the Queen showed her heart, the day the future king found his strength, and the day to people, bound by duty and love and the weight of a crown. Learn that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply be human. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. Golden light spilled across the castle grounds, and for the first time in weeks, William felt like he could breathe again.